So, if I asked you to just name your fundamental rights, you could probably, rattle off a few without even thinking about it.
Oh, absolutely. Like freedom of speech, equality before the law.
Yeah, the right to practice your religion, things like that. We all have a pretty solid grasp on, what the state actually owes us.
Right, the entitlements.
Exactly. But what if I told you there is an entire section of the Constitution explicitly detailing what you owe the state? And, almost nobody talks about it until it literally costs them a crucial mark on a highly competitive exam.
It is honestly the ultimate blind spot. We focus so heavily on the rights, the protections, that we completely glaze over the obligations.
Yeah, which is huge. For you listening right now, whether you are, staring down the barrel of the UPSC Civil Services exam, or maybe you're grinding through mock tests for the SSC or state PSCs, that Indian polity is basically the beating heart of these syllabi.
Without a doubt. It's everywhere.
And the examiners, they know you've memorized your fundamental rights. So to separate the prepared from the unprepared, they set traps. And the most elegant traps are almost always hidden in the fundamental duties.
Because intuitively, duties feel like they should be obvious, right? Like, be a good citizen. But constitutionally, they are incredibly specific. They're historically complex and layered with all this legal nuance.
Which is exactly why we are decoding them today in this deep dive. I like to think of the Constitution as like a premium club membership.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, so the fundamental rights are the glossy brochure, the perks, the pool access, the priority support. But the fundamental duties are the terms and conditions printed in that tiny font at the very bottom of the contract.
Right, the stuff no one reads until their account gets suspended.
Exactly. You need to know both to understand how the club operates. But let's start at the beginning, because these terms and conditions weren't actually in the original 1949 contract, were they?
They weren't, no. When the Constituent Assembly drafted the Constitution, they deliberately, intentionally, left out a specific list of duties.
Wait, deliberately? Why?
Well, their logic at the time was that in a democratic society, especially with India's deep-rooted traditions, civic duties were just implicit.
Like it went without saying.
Exactly. They believed citizens would naturally understand that, enjoying rights required respecting the rights of others and the integrity of the nation. It was assumed.
So if the Founding Fathers thought a written list was completely unnecessary, what changed? How did we go from trusting the implicit goodwill of the citizen to hard-coding 11 specific duties into the supreme law of the land?
To understand that, you really have to look at the political climate in 1976.
The emergency.
Right. This was the era of the national emergency. Democratic norms were, effectively suspended. And the government of the day argued that citizens had become way too obsessed with their rights and had sort of forgotten their obligations to the state.
Which is a pretty heavy accusation.
It was. And from a critical perspective, this was a highly polarized time. Critics viewed this sudden push for duties with intense suspicion. They saw it as a potential tool for the state to enforce compliance, justify authoritarian measures.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But regardless of the political motivations behind it, the government formed the Swaran Singh Committee to formalize these obligations.
Okay, let's look at the mechanics of that committee, because this right here is where the exam traps really start to materialize for the listener.
Oh, big time.
Yeah, so the Swaran Singh Committee goes away, does its research, and comes back with a list. They recommended 8 fundamental duties. But Parliament ends up passing the 42nd Amendment Act, the infamous mini-constitution, and they enact 10 duties.
Right. The government basically took the committee's framework, but expanded it. However, and this is key, the most critical part of this history isn't what Parliament added. It is what Parliament specifically chose to reject from the Swaran Singh recommendations.
This is the absolute goldmine for multiple choice questions, because the committee originally suggested that if a citizen refused to follow a duty, the state should have the power to impose a penalty or a punishment.
Yes, actual legal consequences.
Right. And furthermore, they recommended that any law imposing such a punishment could not be challenged in court.
Which is huge.
And Parliament rejected both of those ideas entirely, flat out.
Why, though? If the government during the emergency was already centralizing power, why back down from giving these duties actual legal fangs?
Honestly, because of the optics and the practicality of it all. Enforcing vague constitutional duties with direct jail time or fines?
It would be a nightmare.
A complete logistical nightmare, and vastly unpopular, even during the emergency. It would have transformed the Constitution from a protective document into a highly punitive one. They wanted the duties to serve as a constant moral and civic guide, not a daily legal tripwire. But there is one specific rejection that I think is just the most brilliant distractor an examiner can use. The Swaran Singh Committee explicitly recommended making it a fundamental duty for citizens to pay their taxes.
Yes, the tax trap.
And Parliament flat out said no.
Which is exactly why it shows up on almost every polity exam.
Seriously, imagine sitting in an exam hall, the clock is ticking, and you see paying taxes listed as an option for a fundamental duty. Your brain immediately thinks, well, of course it is. I have a duty to pay my taxes.
It sounds right. It feels right.
It really does. But constitutionally, under this specific list, it is not there.
Because tax evasion is already handled by incredibly dense statutory laws, like the Income Tax Act. You don't need a vague constitutional clause to audit someone, but it is a guaranteed lost mark if you aren't paying attention to the constitutional text versus just general civic sense.
Exactly. General civic sense will fail you here. And speaking of constitutional texts, it's really worth noting where India looked for inspiration. Because we didn't just invent the concept of codified duties out of thin air. We looked to the Constitution of the USSR.
Which makes total sense given India's geopolitical leanings and, socialist economic tilt during the 1970s.
Yeah. But stepping back, it's fascinating how rare this actually is. If you look at major Western democracies like the US, the UK, France, they focus almost entirely on the rights of the individual.
It is a profound philosophical difference. I mean, Western constitutions are largely built on a foundation of individual liberty. They're heavily influenced by thinkers who wanted to protect the citizen from the state.
Right.
But Eastern and socialist constitutions tend to lean more communitarian. They emphasize the collective and what the individual owes to the society.
Although there is a fascinating outlier here. Among major democratic non-socialist nations, Japan actually includes a robust list of duties for its citizens.
Yeah, because Japan perfectly embodies that intersection, right? A modern democratic political system operating over a deeply communitarian, duty-bound culture. It just shows that rights and duties don't have to be mutually exclusive in a democracy.
Okay, so we have this concept, borrowed from the USSR, heavily debated during the controversial 1976 emergency, and finally stitched into the Constitution via the 42nd Amendment. Structurally, though, how do you insert basically a guidebook into a constitution that is otherwise filled with hard, enforceable laws? Where did they even put it?
They created a completely bespoke section. It's housed in Part 4A of the Constitution. And what makes Part 4A structurally unique is that it contains only one single article, Article 51A.
Just one article.
Yeah, that's it.
But the placement is incredibly deliberate, isn't it? It comes right after Part 4, which contains the directive principles of state policy, essentially the duties of the government.
Correct. So you have the rights of the people in Part 3, the duties of the state in Part 4, and the duties of the people in Part 4. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about who these actually apply to, because we know some fundamental rights apply to anyone on Indian soil. Like, if a tourist is visiting the Taj Mahal, they still have a right to life and personal liberty under Article 21.
Right. The state cannot just arbitrarily arrest them.
Exactly. But do these duties apply to that same tourist?
No, they do not. Article 51A applies exclusively to citizens.
Okay, that is a critical distinction to underline for the exams.
Absolutely. The logic is simple.
Right.
The overarching terms and conditions of a nation like defending the country or cherishing its freedom struggle, that's an exclusive pact between the state and its citizens. A foreign national is expected to obey the laws of the land, sure, but they are not constitutionally bound to, say, develop a scientific temper or strive for excellence in national spheres.
Let's actually look at what we're being asked to do here, because the phrasing of Article 51A is really something else. It is a massive spectrum.
It really is.
On one end, you have deeply historical moral duties. Like Clause B asks citizens to cherish and follow the noble ideals which inspired our national struggle for freedom.
That is a purely moral imperative. It's about historical sentiment. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you have very rigid civic duties, like Clause O demands that you abide by the Constitution and respect its ideals, institutions, the national flag, and the national anthem.
And it covers physical obligations too, right? Like Clause D telling you to defend the country and render national service when called upon. Or Clause G, which requires citizens to protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife.
Yeah, but the clause that often generates the most discussion, at least in academic circles, is Clause H. It reaches past the physical environment and goes straight for the intellectual environment.
Yes. Clause H mandates that citizens develop the scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. I find this absolutely fascinating.
They're very unique.
You are basically placing a constitutional burden on the cognitive development of a citizen. But how does a deeply personal intellectual duty like developing a scientific temper sit alongside something as tangible as don't destroy public property?
It reveals the ultimate ambition of the framers of this amendment. They recognize that a democracy cannot thrive if its citizens are physically compliant but intellectually stagnant.
Oh, wow.
I mean, think about it. You could protect the forests and respect the flag, but if society falls prey to superstition, dogmatism, or a lack of critical inquiry, the nation rots from the inside out. They were literally trying to constitutionalize progress.
That is profound. And speaking of progress, the list itself had to evolve. We started with 10 duties in 1976. But today, if a student marks 10 on their exam, they fail the question.
Yep, completely wrong.
There are 11.
Because society evolved, and the Constitution had to catch up. The 11th duty, Clause Com, was added in 2002 by the 86th Amendment Act.
And that amendment is a watershed moment for Indian polity. It's famous for inserting Article 21A, which made education a fundamental right for children between 6 and 14 years old.
Exactly. And this is where you see the absolute structural beauty of the Constitution when all its parts work together.
How so?
Well, the state has a directive principle to provide early childhood care. Then, the child has a fundamental right under Article 21A to receive that education. But a 6-year-old cannot enroll themselves in school, right?
So that is where the duty comes in.
Precisely. The 86th Amendment added Clause K to Article 51A, making it the fundamental duty of the parent or guardian to provide opportunities for education to their child.
Wow. So the state builds the school, the child has the right to attend it, but the parent has the constitutional duty to walk them through the door.
Exactly. It takes the entire ecosystem to educate a citizen.
That triad is just brilliant. But this brings us to the massive roadblock in this whole discussion. We have these 11 noble, well-crafted directives. They cover everything from the environment to education. Yet, constitutional scholars and critics frequently dismiss Article 51A as a toothless tiger.
Yeah, that term gets thrown around a lot.
They call it a superfluous appendage. Why?
The primary criticism stems from a single legal reality.
Yeah.
Fundamental duties are non-justiciable.
Meaning you cannot be dragged into court simply for violating Article 51A.
Correct. If you fail to develop a scientific temper, or if you don't cherish the ideals of the freedom struggle, the police cannot arrest you for a constitutional violation. There is no direct writ petition someone can file against you for lacking humanism.
So to push back here, if I am a citizen and there is zero punishment for breaking these rules and no direct legal remedy for the state, how is this any different from a politician just giving a moral sermon?
Right.
Why should our listener, or anyone really, care about a rule that has absolutely no teeth?
That is exactly the ammunition the critics use. They argue that a constitution should be a document of enforceable law, not a book of poetry. Furthermore, they argue the wording is dangerously vague.
Like what?
Like what exactly constitutes the composite culture of India mentioned in Clause F?
Oh, true.
If you ask 10 different sociologists, you will get 10 wildly different answers. If a rule is too vague to define, it is basically impossible to follow, let alone enforce.
And the critics also point out the glaring omissions, right? We already mentioned paying taxes, but voting in elections, arguably the most fundamental mechanism of a functioning democracy, is nowhere on the list.
Right. Practicing family planning, which was a massive state priority in the 70s, is also absent.
There is also a very technical structural critique too, isn't there? Legal purists argue that by placing the duties in Part 4A after the directive principles, they are treated as an afterthought.
Yeah, exactly.
So just to clarify for the listener.
Well, the fundamental rights are in Part 3. The psychological flow of the document would dictate that the duties should immediately follow the rights, perhaps as Part 3.
Oh, I see.
That way, the moment a citizen reads about their immense powers, They immediately read about their immense responsibilities. Placing them after Part 4 sort of dilutes their impact.
Okay, I have to admit, I am feeling a little cynical right now.
Understandable.
The duties are vague. They are missing crucial elements like voting. They might be in the wrong chapter, and you can't even be punished for ignoring them. If they are this flimsy, why are they considered a gold mine for the UPSC? Why do the courts even acknowledge them?
Because that cynicism misses the hidden genius of how the Indian legal system actually operates. The duties are not toothless. The teeth are just hidden.
Wait, hidden where?
Hidden within ordinary legislation. And this brings us to arguably the most critical concept for any serious exam candidate to understand. The Verma Committee observations of 1999.
The Verma Committee. Let's break down exactly what they found.
So the Verma Committee was tasked with looking into the operationalization of these duties. And they observed that while Article 51A itself doesn't hand out punishments, Parliament has quietly but forcefully built a massive web of ordinary laws that enforce the spirit of these duties.
Let me try to visualize this. Article 51A isn't like a weapon the government can hit you with directly. It is more like an architectural blueprint.
Yes.
And the ordinary laws passed by Parliament, the penal codes, the environmental acts, those are the actual brick-and-mortar walls built on top of that blueprint.
That is an excellent analogy.
Yeah.
Let's trace a few of these linkages because examiners love testing your ability to connect a duty to its enforcing law.
Okay, lay it on me.
So, Clause A demands respect for the national flag and anthem. As we established, 51A itself has no penalty. But Parliament built a wall on that blueprint, the Prevention of Insults to National Honor Act of 1971.
Right.
If you burn the flag, you weren't charged under Article 51A. You were charged under the 1971 Act, which carries severe penalties.
It makes total sense. And Clause G is about protecting the natural environment and wildlife. So the enforcement mechanism for that blueprint would be what, the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972?
Yes, and the Forest Conservation Act of 1980.
Exactly.
And look at Clause C, which mandates upholding the sovereignty and integrity of India. The ordinary law giving fangs to that duty is the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, or UAPA, from 1967.
Wow.
The Constitution provides the principle. The Parliament provides the penalty.
But what about the judiciary? I mean, how does the Supreme Court view Article 51A if it can't directly enforce it?
This is where we get into the truly high-level constitutional mechanics. For the Supreme Court, fundamental duties act as a powerful interpretive tool.
Interpretive tool.
Yeah, think of Article 51A like a pair of glasses the judges put on when they're trying to determine the constitutionality of a controversial law.
Okay, walk me through how that works in a real-world scenario.
Let's say the government passes a law that bans the manufacture of certain highly polluting single-use plastics.
Happens all the time.
Right. A factory owner immediately challenges this law in the Supreme Court, claiming it violates their fundamental right to practice any profession or carry on any trade under Article 19. They argue the state is restricting their rights.
Which, to be fair, is a valid argument under Part 3.
It is. However, the Constitution allows for reasonable restrictions on those rights. So the judges put on their Article 51A glasses. They look at clause, the duty to protect the environment.
Okay.
The court can then rule that because the government's plastic ban is giving effect to a fundamental duty, the restriction on the factory owner's trade is reasonable.
Oh, wow. So the duty acts as a constitutional shield.
Yes.
It essentially saves the government's law from being struck down.
Precisely. It provides the constitutional justification for the state to limit an individual right for the greater good. So, while critics dismiss them as mere moral sermons, they possess massive legal gravity behind the scenes.
That's incredible.
Ultimately, fundamental duties act as the conscience of the citizen, just as the directive principles act as the conscience of the state.
The conscience of the citizen. That brings us right back to the beginning. The terms and conditions at the bottom of the contract aren't just there to punish you. They are the structural framework that ensures the club doesn't burn to the ground.
Perfectly said.
So, if you are listening and you are staring down a polity paper anytime soon, your survival depends on strategic takeaways, not just rote memorization. Let's quickly synthesize the traps we've uncovered today.
Good idea.
First, know your timeline and context. They were not in the original Constitution. They were born out of the 1976 emergency via the 42nd Amendment and the Swaran Singh Committee.
Right. And second, know the mechanics. They apply only to citizens, not foreigners. They are non-justiciable directly, but they guide the courts as an interpretive lens, and they are enforced through ordinary laws highlighted by the Verma Committee.
And third, know the numbers. The committee recommended 8, Parliament enacted 10, and the 86th Amendment brought us to 11 in 2002.
And my most practical advice for navigating the multiple choice minefield: literally map out clauses A through K on a piece of paper.
Just write them down.
Yeah, write them down, look at the granular differences,
Yeah.
understand why the duty to vote and the duty to pay taxes are incredibly logical civic responsibilities, but are absolutely not fundamental duties. Once you see the matrix clearly, you will never fall for the distractor options again.
Because surviving these exams is about knowing why a wrong answer looks so right. To leave you with a final thought to ponder as you close your notes today, we talked about how the Constitution had to evolve. The 11th duty was added in 2002 because society recognized that facilitating education was a modern necessity requiring a constitutional mandate.
It had to adapt to the times.
Exactly. Now, look at how rapidly our world is changing today. We live in an era dominated by algorithmic echo chambers, deep fakes, and massive data harvesting.
A completely different world from 2002.
So if Parliament were to convene tomorrow to draft a brand new 12 fundamental duties specifically for the digital age, what do you think it would be?
That's a great question.
Would it be a duty to verify information before amplifying it? A duty to protect digital privacy? And more importantly, using the blueprint and wall analogy we just discussed, if they made it a duty, how would we even begin to build the wall to enforce it? Think about that the next time you blindly click I agree on a terms and conditions page.